Today we have here Emeritus Professor Gio Wiederhold. I will give a short intro to him. So Professor Gio Wiederhold is an Emeritus Professor of Computer Science, Electrical Engineering and Medicine at Stanford University. Since 1976, he has supervised 76 PhD theses in these departments. Research topics address database technologies, knowledge-based integration of information, and algebra over ontologies, access to simulations to augment design making, privacy protection in collaborative settings, composition of software, and contributions to the semantic web. Since his retirement, Professor Gio is spending most of his time consulting for MIT Corporation, serving the US Treasury on valuation of software and related IP being transferred internationally. Professor Wiederhold has authored and co-authored more than 300 publications and reports on computing and medicine, including an early popular database design textbook, now in the ACM Digital Library. Professor Gio Wiederhold was born in Italy, received a degree in aeronautical engineering in Holland in 1957, and a PhD in medical information science from the University of California at San Francisco in 1976. In between, he spent 16 years in the software industry. His industrial career followed computer technologies, starting with numerical analysis applied to rocket fuel, implementation of Fortran and PL1 compilers, real-time data acquisition, and a time-oriented database system, eventually becoming a corporate software architect. Professor Gio has also worked and subsequently consulted for the United Nations Development Programme on projects in India and China. Professor Gio spent 1991 to 1994 as the program manager for knowledge-based system at DARPA in Washington, D.C. Now I will give a short abstract of the talk. Most economists, when trying to build their models, fail to adequately consider the role of IP in modern trade. That is in part due to their training in a century where tangibles and financial capital dominated, and in part due to the lack of data, since corporate reports only provide financial information. Understanding the flow of IP from creation to revenue generation and its aggregate effect on national economies has applicability to high-tech product design, resource acquisition, production, marketing, selection of business structures to maximize profit and minimize risk, outsourcing, trading policies, and the impact of taxation policies. So with that short introduction and the abstract, I now invite Professor Gio to give his talk.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. I was in Madras 2 times before, one in 1965 and one in 1995. It's all new and it is all better than what I'm seeing here. I'm talking here about a topic that is not typically covered. But I do expect that it will be important in the future for people to learn about it, because computing has now embraced all of our efforts. So I won't go through the topic list. You'll have a copy of the slides available, by the way. I suppose you will post them somewhere. What is the state at the moment when we talk about IP? Everybody talks having more IP and more intellectual property and software taking over the world. But the people here, which are probably mainly software creators, traditionally care about the cost of creating the IP, the software, the firmware, the designs of the chips, and even business methods, the time to complete and update the products, and they look, of course, at always having new capabilities, innovating in the competition. But when the products are done, they're innocent. At that point, it's business people, lawyers, promoters, economists that talk about IP, and no longer the creators. And because all these people have different objectives, it's often very inconsistent how the IP is valued. I will kind of focus mainly on IP in software because that's easily understood. But recipes in pharmaceutical companies, the designs of chips, all those things are quite similar. Why should also computer scientists care about the value? If they have a business, they should know about for sales. If you sell it for the wrong price, however, you can make corrections. It's not that fatal. If you don't sell enough, you can lower the price. Otherwise, you can raise the price, maybe. But not that much software is sold. It is often licensed. And then you engage in a royalty contract, and that often has little flexibility. People worry about losing IP. There's a risk of losing valuable IP, and even government officials are concerned about that. But if you don't know what the IP is worth, then the percentage of risk is meaningless. It's, of course, necessary for taxation. IP is becoming a valuable export and import, and having the wrong prices set means that taxes could be too much. Much more often, taxes are avoided. IP is now a major item in international trade. And that is important to look at the relative positions of countries and see what the IP is. And all countries talk about IP. The US is very proud of its IP provenance, but nobody knows what the value of the IP was. It doesn't go on ships. It doesn't go through customs. It's invisible, and it can be transported very fast. All governments, including, I see in the recent budget, want to focus on generating more IP. For such an investment, you should know what the value is. The government talks the right words, but has no idea what the value is, so it's actually justify spending the right amount on such investments. What is IP? It's an intangible. Essentially, it's a product of knowledge by authors that create books, programmers that create software, engineers that make inventions, but also by advertisements that establish trademarks, managers that have know-how how to market and bring a product to the market, and also the customer loyalty that is engendered when you have high-quality products. Now, a definition. We all depend here on intellectual resources. Some of them are public and some of them are private. Everything that you learn here at IIT Madras is public. You cannot make money just by spouting back what you learned. Anybody can compete with you. If you have a business, then you have something called intellectual capital. Intellectual capital includes smart people and the IP for which you have established rights. Rights can be patents, and can be kept as trade secrets, copyright, etc. So that is the intellectual property that is legally protectable. You can, intellectual assets go in between because, and India does it, it can sell the rights to the use of smart people. That's an intellectual asset, and it is sold. It has a value. And again, there are no good methods for assessing these in a global sense. So it's important for a background to know what IP protection is. There are patents. Patents are used when the invention is visible in the product. In software, if you don't release a source code, and many patents in the fine thing, much software in the fine print says you're not allowed to reverse engineer it, then it's not visible. So that is typically not covered by patents. You can also use patents just to hinder others. Copyright means that other people cannot copy things, and that includes a binary code. It's very hard to prove if those copies are internally made or part of it or part of a larger item. So it turns out that in the cases that I've studied, about 80% of the value is protected by trade secret. You sign as an employee a non-disclosure agreement, All the contractors that work with you sign non-disclosure agreements, so all the work stays inside the company. You can also have contractual rights. You can have contractual rights via the customers. You can also have important employees may have contracts that they're not allowed to work for another company for some time. Some can be very hard to enforce. The problem still with IP protection, any kind, it's costly. It's hard to assess how much to spend on IP protection if you don't know what it's worth. So you have the people. How do you protect people from leaving? You encourage loyalty. You know, you give them pride in the company. You can give them stock options, and you may have some contracts. Then you have the actual intellectual property that they work with, the patents they generate, the copyright, the trade secret, that they both generate and exploit. You put those things together in what economists call an IP box. The IP box can be split into tranches. For instance, you may keep all the IP in the box except what you sell in China because you don't have the competence to sell in China, so you can sell IP in tranches, in slices. If you sell it, however, then you have no control. So often the tranches are licensed. So you can keep IP, but license the tranche. All this fits into a broader economic loop. We have the public and private investments, and the public investment lead to the common knowledge. With common knowledge, you only create commodity products that anyone can duplicate. Those have only routine earnings and will only collect small taxes. But if you combine the know-how of your workforce, MNC stands short for multinational corporation, but you can plug any company in that you know. And then they have the protected intellectual property. You integrate it all. It becomes technology. It creates valuable trademarks. Now you have a high-value product. On a high-value product, you have what's called non-routine earnings, which is a very high fraction of the sale price, and you'll be able to, the government should be able to collect more taxes on them. So if you have a business, you have three parts that have value: the tangible goods, the buildings and computers, capital, a very small fraction in most IP-oriented business, the know-how of the management and the employees, and the actual intellectual property. You have to check that it's owned properly, and so that's really, IP can mean two things. When you think of the generation, it's called intellectual property. When you see of selling it, then it's called intangible property, because you cannot sell it. IP is independent of the product. If you have Coca-Cola, you can sell Coke, and you can make a routine profit because anybody can buy the syrup and the recipe from Coca-Cola and have a contract with them. But the formula for Coke is extremely valuable. So the same thing you can do with iPhones, but you don't sell the embedded firmware. That is a valuable thing in order that allows you to make more new iPhones. If you do software, your distributor sells the software, you have to decide how much does the distributor get and how much will you get. Now comes the big rule for valuing intellectual property. The value of the property is the future income it can generate. So if you want to estimate it, you have to essentially look what is the sales of the future income, sales. If you give a maintenance fee for maintaining your software, which the bigger companies like Oracle do. Then you have maintenance fees, and you can have royalties from all kinds of intermediaries. If you make chip software, typically you depend on royalties because the chip alone is a small part of an iPhone, and you have to create royalties from that. From that, you have to subtract the cost. The cost of goods sold, once you have them, is very small incrementally. You have the cost of marketing. That has a big range. If you have a successful product that sells itself virally, it could be nearly zero. If you have something that requires a lot of advertisement to get attention, it can be much more than the other costs of generating the product. You have a cost of doing business, and you have a cost of maintenance. The reason I give the percentages here is so that people have an initial sense. If you ever make a business plan, you can use these numbers and decide where you expect to fall. One problem is that future income is worthless, because if you get $1, not a rupee, in future years, it is worth not as much today, and that is determined by discount value. The discount value depends on the risk. If you have a very risky product, then you're not sure of the future income, and you will have maybe a discount value of 25, so that the next year dollar would only be worth 75%. If you have a very stable cost, then you have low discount values. Businesses and investors realize these differences, but it's good if you know something about that if you start your own company. You don't make money immediately. You have to do the development. So typically there's some research. At some point the research starts being promising enough that you start some development. There will be some research continuing. Once you have a credible product, you have to start testing. So those are the three phases of development, and they overlap. Oh. If you have a mature company, you can start up rapidly with a new product. So you use a top curved line. If you're a startup, you typically start slower. Both types of growth have limitations, you should realize. A mature company cannot immediately have 100 people working on a product. You have to have a few and then organize it, etc. So there is a limit to the initial growth. For a startup, the limit is at the other side. When you're successful and ready to go, sometimes you cannot hire people at a high enough rate. So these limits determine your development environment. Then you get the benefits. You can have independent product sales. Often people think of only selling a product once. But if you have valuable IP, you want to sell it over much time. But that means you may have to provide updates and versions. You have to decide how to pay for updates and those versions, because over the many years that a product can live, there can be much greater expenses in your original development. Or you can transfer rights for royalties. You can you can sell your bright idea to an independent manufacturer and distributor and then get a certain fraction. Or you can sell it where it's actually hidden in another product, and then you'll be dependent on the sales of that product. Now we know the principles. How do you actually assess it? The technical alternative, which I indicated initially, is to estimate income prediction. And a venture capitalist will make such a curve. It's good that you have some idea how it does it, because then you can talk intelligently with the people that are funding you. If you have a very stable company that does stable research, you can also use your experience of previous benefits of your research. That doesn't work for startups. It works for very stable companies like IBM, which can use research rollover estimates in order to start the valuation. You can also look at broader estimates. Once you sell shares, either that you actually have had an IPO or that you use the initial secondary market, then you can estimate the market capitalization. Here you use the information of the crowd. And of course, the crowd can often be wrong, but as you know, over that whole, they're often not that far off. You will use comparisons with other existing business. If you're in the games, you look at other games and you think, how much of a slice of that game income can you get? A problem that many people do not consider sufficiently is that IP products are actually not stable. When you come first out, let's say with software, you have to do corrective maintenance. You have to take care of bugs, cases that you didn't think of, conditions, completions, maybe some uses that customers make that you didn't even think of. For those, you have to react very fast, because if you're not successful here, your product will fail. But over the long term, that is not the major cost. But you have to do adaptive maintenance. Adaptive maintenance deals with the interfaces. Your product will work with certain chips, certain communications conventions, certain habits that people acquire from other software. You have to be able to adapt to them. And then you have to do perfective maintenance, make your product bigger and better all the time. So those things is what I estimate cost about the 15% that I mentioned earlier. And that affects the value of what you have initially. The dark red block at the side is a depiction of the product as it exists. But now you change it, and over time, depending how much it is, you replace some software, other things. So the price, the value of the product you have, even if it stays the same, has a smaller content of the original product. So if you want to estimate the value without the future maintenance, you have to discount that a large amount. You'll have ongoing work. And unfortunately, you don't get a better price for the same product. If you look at a product like Microsoft Word, which had a couple of $100K when it was Word 1, and you look at the price of Microsoft Word today, when it's not quite gigabytes yet, but certainly much larger, the price in current dollars is approximately the same. Because people will not want to spend a larger fraction of their total income, their total resources, on something that they perceive to be the same item. So now you can combine your initial cost and revenues and make a line. And in between is a period where the development is done. You release it to some participants for testing. And then a bit later, you do general availability. For software, that can be a short time. If you do chips, that can be 3 or 4 years, because you have to have a chip, convince people that make, I'll use iPhones again as an example, to put it in their product, but it won't appear in their product until many years later. So there can be a long period where you actually don't get a large quantity of income, even though that you've made the sales. Once you start testing, you can also have to spend some effort on marketing it, so that when it's ready, people will know about it and will evaluate it. So you have also marketing expenses that go there. In accounting, it's funny. Once you have the product, the marketing expenses are part of operations. Until you have the product ready, the marketing expenses are part of the investment you have to make. So, as an example, you can have the valuation by the crowd in the stock market. And here I used SAP, company I'm fairly familiar with, and you probably know. Actually, I just mentioned that the person who is now your CEO of Infosys, and I saw his picture in the paper a few days ago. He was a student of mine. You know, he was a CTO of SAP and worked with me. We look at the company. It had a market cap, the value of its stock, of about 31 billion euros. Its book value was 6 billion euro. Everything that an accountant could see as being valuable. The difference was 25 billion. So what the accountants see is a small fraction. And actually, SAP is a company that has a relatively high book value because they own their own buildings, beautiful, buildings, Trump would say, and they have investments that accountants could see. But you see that the market thinks that the future income is much more than what SAP could realize from its tangibles, about 4 times as much. And a ratio of 4 to 5 or even 10 is what we see in IP companies. So if you start off, you have all kinds of uncertain methods to estimate the value. You don't choose a best method. You look at all of them and you try to explain where the differences are. If something is very, very wrong, like at the bottom, you can assume that's an error. The others you explain. In practice, you find that the top bubble that you see is often the estimates by the company's founders. They think, of course, the company being very valuable. The market value may be somewhere in between, etc. So use as many methods as you can, and then you take an average. Or if you're a statistician, you use the interquartile mean to get rid of extreme values. So now you can make a business plan. Again, for the capital cost, which are a major factor in tangible industries, in steel companies, auto companies, tend to be very small. And so you see that in these companies, it's about a 5% cost that you pay for interest or have to pay out in dividends, etc. Routine operations, not requiring IP, everything that the business does, I would start first at 45%. I give a little hint value there. When I look at a company, I like to know whether it's efficiently managed. And you know that one person can manage about 7 plus or minus 2 people. That's how much you can keep in your brain at one point. So I take the 7th root of the number of employees, and that should be the right number of management levels. If you have many more management levels, I consider that the company is inefficiently managed. If you have fewer than that, then I get the impression the company is poorly managed because there's probably not good control in the company. And then you look at the actual IP generating expense, namely research and software. And again, at the 0 level, I assume that that would be 25% and 25% for advertising and marketing. Again, that will differ once you understand the company better and see how much marketing versus R&D is necessary. It looks that IP has an infinite life because it doesn't wear out, it doesn't rust. In fact, other than, if you have a vehicle, it wears out if it gets used more. IP actually becomes more valuable if more people use it. But it does require maintenance. And the maintenance of IP is actually more costly than the maintenance of a car and maintenance of other things that you may own. And I talked about maintenance earlier. I estimate, again, at the zero level, that you'll be spending 15% per year of the total. That 15%, the total increases because the next year it's 115%. Then the next year the total is 132%, etc. At a given moment, you will find that your maintenance costs you more than the income. So I built spreadsheets that take that into account in order to project when I reach the expected end of life of my IP, which is again important for estimating the future value. So here you have a curve with development cost, over time. Testing, as a product, it becomes more mature because you have to satisfy all existing customers, is about 50%. If you make a product that does not satisfy your previous customers, you go down the drain very quickly. And I have examples. I don't have time to talk about the examples here, but you can probably see cases where companies thought they have an all-new product, wonderful. It wasn't compatible, and the company goes down the drain and is picked up cheaply. The company that I was thinking of was actually picked up by IBM because it gave them some customers, but everybody was unhappy. Now, at the same time, you have competition. The competition could start, and they would have a faster growth curve. They don't have to test quite as much, because things are new. So you have to make sure that in that period that a competitor could develop something, you improve your product sufficiently that you keep ahead of the competition. You can't relax. Now I'll talk a bit about the international flow of IP. When you start, and I start here with a company that is based in the US, it will have distribution regions like in Latin America or Europe or Asia, right? And there will be some R&D, for instance, in India, that is supported directly by the US company. All the income would essentially go to the US. The US would collect taxes on it. Companies don't like to pay taxes. So another thing is that they can delegate then European sales to a local company and set the fees or royalties. They can also establish a company in Europe, to set and then arrange similar fees of royalties. You can also have companies where you initially give things away for free. Like Adobe produced initially one software package to generate PDF files and to read PDF files. It wasn't very successful because you had to buy a big package to read PDF. In 1993, they made an arrangement with the American tax authorities that if Adobe would put a reader for free, the tax authorities would publish all their forms, the hundreds of forms, in PDF. So the tax authorities had to buy copies of the full package, but the reader became free. And PDF became, not quite an open, in a couple of years, became the dominant format that was used. They gave the reader away for free, but since everybody who paid taxes and later nearly everybody else had a PDF reader, Other companies would buy the PDF writer, the generator, and Adobe made a profit. That lasted for about 20 years, as long as the patent protection lasted, because they had to use patents, because then it was publicly visible what PDF did. So now you can get PDF writers also for nearly free. When you share IP, you have to decide, are you just the inventor and you contract with the developer, who does then also do the manufacture, marketing, and selling? Or do you want to share it with a participant and you work jointly? It gives a different model of the way you share and expect royalties. So now we can go back for your business to the original profit. If you just make routine earnings, you may earn 1 to 8% of your sales. If you have IP, valuable IP, you have non-routine earnings, and you can earn 20 to 60% of your sales. Quite a difference. If you engage in offshoring, of course, India is much of a destination for offshoring, you have to have teams in other countries. I have an edit error here. This should be the first choice requires a lot of effort and spending to start your own subsidiary in India. But it gives you good control. Or you can go to a controlled independent contractor with good staff, like, let's say, Infosys. They can work for multiple companies. They can put, flexibility. The word subsidiary corporations should be on the one line. And then you can have exclusive use in a subsidiary corporation and investment to set up. So offshoring of such work requires IP to transfer, to be transferred to India so that your workers can be productive. What happens to the ownership? So you have initial design here, then you have technical investment, then you have development in both countries, and now you can separate. You can have product sales within the United States, and you can have product sales anywhere else in the world. Since now the product is jointly developed, you don't have to pay taxes on the foreign income necessarily, only on the IP that you provided. So now companies rearrange their work. It gets much more complex. They have all the flow of money work to an intermediate company that I call CAS, because it sounds like the Dutch word for cheese. Often these companies are in the Netherlands or in Luxembourg. And they collect all the money for you for the foreign exchange. And they collect the money. Since your product costs very little, maybe, let's say 30%, 70% of the profits stay there, but they don't keep them in the country. They transfer it to a tax haven. So you don't have to pay any taxes. Cayman Islands, Vanuatu, many companies. Even in the financial industry, the same flow goes, because a financial bank in New York will develop software that is then used in its other branches. It's tested and developed. The profits they make are then not just the profit from the software, but the profits that are from the software and their financial analyst. But they'll also have financial analysts in London. They use the same software. And so the profits, again, get split. Some of the profits flow. So again, you have an IP flow, but here the intellectual capital is also split. Anytime you have a product, you can convert it to an intangible rights. If you have a building, which is very tangible, you can sell the right to sell the building to somebody, and that right is an intangible. And you can sell tranches to it, and then you can stay in the same building, but now you pay right to the new owner of the building. Nothing changes except maybe a brass plaque on the building, and maybe the people that do the cleaning of the building change, But you've converted the tangible to an intangible. And so you can do this, and of course, once it's an intangible, you can transfer the intangible to some tax haven. If you transfer an intangible that is based on the building, somebody will know how much the building was worth. So you cannot escape taxes. If you don't do a proper valuation of IP transfer in a similar case, nobody will know what it was worth. So to organize such a big business, now you have a bigger business, you have 3 types of tax haven in one company, sometimes referred to as the Dutch sandwich. They're all in places where the taxes are low, where supervision is minimal, and where reporting requirements for what you are doing are minimal. So you have a primary tax haven, and of course we first think of the Cayman Islands. Closer to here is Vanuatu, a French island in the Pacific, used predominantly by French companies, etc. Then you have what is referred as a semi-tax haven. And India, in many ways, is a semi-tax haven, because for your people to work here, they have used IP that are originally developed somewhere. The companies set themselves up that your Indian company has to pay for the IP rights that now reside in a tax haven. And they arrange the royalties nicely so that the Indian company doesn't make any profit and the Indian government doesn't get any taxes. India profits from employment, but not from the company business itself. And then you have the conduit tax havens that shovel the money around. Those are typically small countries that seem to be very trustworthy. The Netherlands, Luxembourg. For them, since not much is sold there, the losses of giving a favorable tax treatment to your company are little, but they make a profit by doing nice shuffling of money so that nobody ever sees where the money is going. So here I can try to illustrate the flow. Much software gets generated on the top right in a semi-tax haven. Some products are sold to the US. IP has flowed to the semi-tax haven. IP rights have flowed to the Cayman Islands. It's only the rights. There's no IP, there's no documents, there's no CDs being kept in the tax haven that contain the IP. It's only a book entry in a bank ledger. And then you have the conduit items in between that shuffle all the funds around. In the end, that has become something that an economist calls stateless income, so that the large companies get income that doesn't belong to any country anymore. And India is a participant, the Netherlands. I didn't want to just accuse the Cayman Islands, so I called it Palm Island. So you now get a 3-party flow where you have a sub-corporation that owns the right to the IP. You have offshore job sites in your profits from having employment, but the government doesn't profit much. So as a summary, the results of intellectual efforts all travel worldwide. They're very hard to track because they don't appear on the books. I gave the example of SAP. No IP on the books. Since it's poorly understood, its efforts are ignored. the people here that create IP essentially have a loss of control. They have a job, but they have no control over the benefits of the work that they're doing. If businesses don't know what the value of the IP is, they may make poor investment. We have economists and think tanks that give advice to businesses and to governments, and since they don't see the IP, they give often very bad advice. You know. Again, I read some of the budget considerations that came in the Indian budget. They talk about, you know, shifting people around, shifting finance around, investments. No mention anywhere of IP, even though the heading says we have to promote innovation and IP in India. So in the end, the governments lose a lot of income. And in the past, that wasn't that great. When computing started, you know, about 50 years ago, it was just great technology. You know, just like when the Bright brothers built their first plane, it was great technology. Nobody saw it as a business. It had to grow, become reliable, become saleable. Now, when you build an aircraft, people don't think of it as technology in the design. They decide how much profit can be made, how much passengers can it carry, how long will it live, what will the profits, the value of the airplane be. But we're not yet doing that with our intellectual property. But today, IP is even more pervasive than aircraft are. You know, aircraft are still tangible and well understood. I think it's important that in the future, a much broader community understands, books, records, and values IP. Thank you. If there's any questions.
I have a couple of questions. My name is Vijay Kumar. I work for a telecom company.
Oh, yeah.
Firstly, regarding the taxation, particularly in a software product, let's say there is a company in the US and it has a subsidiary in India. It has also outsourced some part of the software to a third country. Now, when you look at the software, let's say there are pieces of IP of 3 countries in that product. So you talked about the taxation part of it. If it is sold in the US, the government taxes it. If the product is sold in other countries, because the IP is, if you really look at software, some modules are created by some people. So there is a complete mix, and that too not in certain order. The modules can be mixed together and create that product. So in that sense, what actually happens to the taxation of where the subsidiary is located and where the outsourced offshore thing is located?
I mean, I do valuations of actual companies, and then I have separate lines for the various items. So, you know, where it comes from, and sometimes it involves interviewing people at the companies to see where it was created, etc., making reasonable estimate. You don't have to get it precise to the last %, but you can build models that are sufficiently credible and that can be defended. Those models are complex. They take, in my work, some models have taken 3 years to build, you know, but that sometimes becomes necessary. At the same time, if you buy my book, you see that I have a funny recommendation at the end, which was not my intent when I started writing the book on multinationals and taxation. Namely, I think actually that corporations should not be taxed at all. You know, that's an unacceptable thing. But if you would not tax corporations, then more income would come to individuals. It works in the US. It would work in the US because individuals that receive dividends and capital gains are known and well taxed. It would not work in some other countries. I don't know about India, but for instance, it wouldn't work in Italy, where tax collection from individuals works very poorly. So I would rather see that the income would be fully distributed over the population that benefits, and that would be taxed. Then you wouldn't have the complexity. But it's my recommendation won't be accepted because people that have a liberal point of view say, tax the corporations for all you can, right? And the rich people realize that they would actually lose if they would actually pay the taxes that corporations avoid now.
The second question is about IP. You had mentioned about software, the models that you had shown, but if you look at products like, say for example, a novel or a film, that is also intellectual property, but that the models are completely different from, let's say, a software, because you don't change it, you don't maintain it, you don't do anything with it.
Right, and then the value just diminishes over time because there's not, you know, a film has high sales in the beginning and then the sales go down. You know, indeed you don't maintain it, but the long-term value, the value in perpetuity, tends not to be that high. With books, it's somewhere in between because you can come out with new editions at times. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And as a token of our gratitude, I would request Professor Nagarajan to offer our gift to Professor Gio.